I worked at Harmon and Sons Funeral Home for 6 years before any of this happened. 6 years of embalming, dressing, and preparing the dead. 6 years of grieving families in quiet rooms, and the particular smell that never quite leaves your clothes no matter how many times you wash them. I thought I had seen everything death could show a person. I was wrong. The night it started was unremarkable. February, cold as hell, the kind of cold that makes your bones feel brittle. I was working the overnight shift alone, which was standard. Most of the prep work happened during the day, but someone always stayed to receive any late arrivals. Bodies don't care about business hours. Around 9, the transport van pulled up with a delivery from County General. Single occupant. Male, late 50s, found dead in his apartment after neighbors complained about the smell. He had been there for about 4 days before anyone noticed. The paperwork listed cause of death as cardiac arrest, but the real story was written on his body. He had fallen against his radiator when he collapsed, and the heat had done things to the side of his face and torso that I won't describe in detail. Let me just say that when flesh stays pressed against hot metal for days, it doesn't stay flesh for long. His name was Gerald Whitmore. I remember that because of what came later. I signed for him, helped the driver wheel him into the receiving room, and then I was alone with him. Standard procedure was to log him in, take some photos for our records, and get him into cold storage until the morning when we would start the real work. The family hadn't been contacted yet. There was no family, as far as anyone knew. Gerald Whitmore was going to be a county burial, which meant minimal preparation, a cheap casket, and a plot in the municipal cemetery, where the markers are flat to make mowing easier. I pulled back the sheet to take my photos, and that was when I first felt it. This sense of being watched. I know how that sounds. I had been alone with hundreds of bodies. They don't watch you. They don't do anything. They are objects, complicated biological machinery that has stopped functioning. I had never felt watched by a corpse before, and I told myself I wasn't feeling it now. It was late. I was tired. The building made noises when it was cold outside, pipes contracting and that kind of thing. But I took my photos faster than usual, and I covered him back up without my normal care, and I wheeled him into storage maybe a little too quickly. The storage room held 8 refrigerated compartments, stacked 2 high. We only had 3 occupied that night. Gerald went into the bottom left. I slid him in, closed the door, and went back to the front office to finish my paperwork. Around 11, I heard something from the back of the building. It was a thump. Just one, not loud, but distinct. The kind of sound a hand would make if it hit a flat surface. I stopped writing and listened. Nothing else came. The building settled in the cold, I told myself. Pipes. Something outside. 100 explanations that weren't the one I was thinking. I went back to my paperwork. 20 minutes later, another sound. This time it was more like dragging. Something heavy moving slowly across a surface. It came from the direction of the storage room. I sat at my desk for probably 2 full minutes, not moving, barely breathing. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. I was 43 years old. I had been doing this job for years, and I was scared to walk down a hallway in my own workplace. I got up. I got a flashlight even though all the lights worked. I walked down the hall towards storage. The door was closed, just like I had left it. I opened it. The room was cold and quiet. The compartment doors were all shut. Nothing had moved. Nothing was out of place. I stood there for a while, shining my flashlight around even though the overhead lights were on. I was looking for something, anything, that would explain what I had heard. I found nothing. When I closed the storage room door behind me, I felt relief. And then I felt stupid for feeling relief. There was nothing to be relieved about, because there had been nothing wrong in the first place. I went back to the front office and tried to concentrate on work. I couldn't. I kept looking down the hallway toward the back of the building. Around midnight, I decided to check on things one more time. Just to settle my nerves, I told myself. Just to prove to myself that everything was normal. I walked back to the storage room. I opened the door. Gerald Whitmore's compartment was open about 6 inches. I stopped breathing. I just stood there, staring at that gap where the door hadn't quite closed all the way. Except it had. I remembered sliding it shut. I remembered the click of the latch engaging. I told myself the latch must be faulty. Old equipment, cold temperatures, metal contracting. There was a logical explanation. There is always a logical explanation. I walked over to the compartment. I could see his feet through the gap, still covered by the sheet. I reached out and pulled the door open the rest of the way. Gerald Whitmore was exactly where I had left him. Same position, same everything. His eyes were closed. His hands were at his sides. He was dead. Of course he was dead. I pushed the tray back in and closed the door firmly. I heard the latch click. I pulled on the door to make sure. It was secure. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my desk and watched the hallway and waited for morning to come. When my co-worker Dennis arrived at 7, I told him about the compartment door. He said it had happened before, years ago, and they had fixed it. He said I should have written it up so maintenance could look at it. He said I looked like hell and should go home and get some rest. I went home. I tried to sleep. I kept seeing that gap in the compartment door. I kept thinking about the sounds I had heard. The next night I was scheduled off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I called Dennis around 10 and asked how everything was going. He said fine, boring, normal. He asked why I was asking. I said no reason. The night after that, I was back on shift. Gerald Whitmore was still in storage. His preparation was scheduled for the following morning. No family had come forward, which meant the county would handle arrangements, which meant no rush. He would stay in his compartment until we got around to him. I did my rounds at 9. All compartment doors were secure. Everything was normal. At 10:30, I heard the thump again. This time I went straight back to storage. I didn't hesitate. I didn't let myself think about what I might find. All compartment doors were secure. Nothing had moved. But there was a smell in the room that hadn't been there before. Not the usual smell of the place, which I was used to. This was different. Sweet and rotten and thick. Like spoiled fruit mixed with something dead. It was strong enough to make my eyes water. The smell was coming from Gerald Whitmore's compartment. I opened it. What I saw made me stumble backward until I hit the opposite wall. The sheet was off. It had been over his entire body when I closed the door on my rounds. Now it was bunched at his feet. And his arm, his right arm, was no longer at his side. It was raised, the hand dangling over the edge of the tray, fingers curled slightly as if he had been reaching for something. Bodies do move sometimes. I knew this. Gases build up, muscles contract. The dead can sit up, can make sounds, can do all sorts of things that have nothing to do with life. I had seen it before. I had been trained on it. But I had never seen a body pull off its own sheet. I had never seen a body raise its arm like it was trying to climb out. I stood there against the wall, breathing hard, trying to think. The smell was so bad I could taste it. Gerald Whitmore was right in front of me, his ruined face turned toward the ceiling, his arm hanging off the tray. I made myself move. I walked over to the compartment. I pushed his arm back onto the tray. The flesh was cold and stiff, just like it should be. I pulled the sheet back up, covering him completely. I slid the tray in and closed the door and heard the latch click. Then I left the room and went to the front office and sat at my desk and tried to convince myself that what I had seen had a rational explanation. I couldn't. At midnight, I heard something that wasn't a thump. It was footsteps. They were slow and heavy and uneven, like someone walking who didn't quite remember how. They were coming from the back of the building, moving toward the front, moving toward me. I grabbed my flashlight. I don't know why. It was a weapon, I guess, or at least something to hold on to. I stood up from my desk and faced the hallway. The footsteps stopped. I waited. A minute passed, then 2. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I walked down the hallway. I checked the storage room. All compartment doors were closed. I checked the prep room, the viewing room, the bathroom, the supply closet. Everything was empty. Everything was normal. Except it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Something was in the building with me that shouldn't be there. I went back to the front office. I sat down. I picked up my phone and almost called Dennis. Almost called my manager. Almost called the police. But what would I say? A body moved. I heard footsteps. They would think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was losing my mind. I made it through the rest of the night. I don't know how. I just sat there, watching the hallway, listening for sounds that didn't come. When morning arrived and the day shift showed up, I was still sitting in the same position. Dennis asked me again if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I told him the compartment door had opened again. He said he would look at it. I went home. I slept for 3 hours, then woke up from a dream I couldn't remember, but that left me shaking. That evening, I called in sick. I couldn't go back. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what was happening. The next morning, I got a call from my manager. Gerald Whitmore's preparation had been completed. There had been a problem. When they opened his compartment, the sheet had been off again, and there were marks on the inside of the compartment door. Scratches, like someone had been trying to get out. My manager asked if I had noticed anything strange. I told him about the compartment opening on its own. I didn't tell him about the arm. I didn't tell him about the footsteps. He said it was probably just old equipment, but he sounded uncertain. He said they were going to expedite the burial. The county had approved it. Gerald Whitmore would be in the ground by the end of the week. I should have felt relieved. I didn't. Something told me it wasn't going to be that simple. The burial was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I wasn't on shift, but I went anyway. I told myself I needed closure. I needed to see him go into the ground and know that it was over. The municipal cemetery was on the edge of town, next to a county road that didn't see much traffic. There was no service, no mourners, just the grave diggers and the cheap casket, and the plot that had been waiting for whoever needed it next. I stood at a distance and watched them lower him in. It started raining when they began filling the hole. Cold rain, almost ice, the kind that stings when it hits your skin. The grave diggers worked quickly. Within an hour there was nothing but fresh dirt where Gerald Whitmore had been. I went home and slept better than I had in days. A week passed, then 2. Nothing happened. I went back to work and everything was normal. I started to think I had imagined the whole thing, or at least exaggerated it in my mind. Bodies moved sometimes. Latches failed. Old buildings made strange sounds. There was nothing supernatural about any of it. Then Mrs. Patterson came in. She was 78 years old. She had died in her sleep at an assisted living facility on the nice side of town. Natural causes, peaceful passing, a full life. Her family was large and loving and wanted the best for her. We scheduled viewings, a service, the whole thing. I wasn't worried about her. Why would I be? She was nothing like Gerald Whitmore. Her death had been gentle. Her body was intact. There was no reason to think anything strange would happen. The first night she was in storage, I did my rounds at 9 as usual. All compartment doors were secure. I went back to the front office. At 10:15, I heard a thump. I told myself it wasn't possible. I told myself it was a coincidence. I walked back to storage and opened the door. Mrs. Patterson's compartment was open about 6 inches, the same amount as Gerald Whitmore's had been. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I walked over to the compartment and pulled the door open. Mrs. Patterson was exactly where she should be. Eyes closed, hands folded on her chest. She looked peaceful, dignified, ready for her family to see her. But she hadn't been there when I closed the compartment earlier. She had been on her back with her hands at her sides. The funeral director had posed her that afternoon. I had seen her, lying flat, hands down. Now her hands were folded. She had moved. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. I was trying to process what I was seeing, trying to find an explanation that made sense. I couldn't find one. I pushed the tray back in. I closed the door. I heard the latch click. I pulled on the door to make sure. Then I went back to the front office and sat at my desk and didn't move until morning. The viewing was the next day. Mrs. Patterson's family came in, a dozen of them, crying and hugging and telling stories about her life. The funeral director showed them into the viewing room where she was laid out in her casket. I heard the scream from the front office. I ran. Everyone ran. We all ended up in the viewing room, staring at Mrs. Patterson in her casket. Her eyes were open. Not all the way, just slightly, like she was trying to see through narrow slits. Her mouth was open too, just a crack, her lips pulled back enough to show a glimpse of her teeth. Her granddaughter was the one who had screamed. She was on the floor now, having fainted. Others were crying, shouting. backing away from the casket like Mrs. Patterson might climb out of it. The funeral director got everyone out of the room. He closed the doors. He looked at me. We both knew that he had closed her eyes. We both knew that he had arranged her face into a peaceful expression. We both knew that what we were seeing was impossible. We fixed her. We adjusted her expression back to what it should be. We opened the doors and let the family back in and told them it was a reaction to the chemicals, which was a lie. Bodies don't react to embalming fluid by opening their eyes. Bodies don't do anything. The family accepted the explanation because they wanted to. They held their viewing. They had their service. Mrs. Patterson was buried in the family plot at St. Michael's Cemetery, in a nice casket, with flowers and prayers and people who loved her. I thought it was over. I was wrong again. 3 nights later, I was closing up the building after a late viewing when I heard something from the storage room. Not a thump this time, not footsteps. Voices, low and indistinct, multiple people talking at once, the words blending together into a murmur I couldn't quite make out. It sounded like a conversation. It sounded like an argument. It sounded like something that couldn't possibly be happening in a room full of dead bodies. I should have left. I should have walked out the front door and never come back. But I didn't. I walked toward the sound. The storage room door was closed. The voices were coming from behind it. I could hear them clearly now, though I still couldn't make out the words. They were getting louder, getting more agitated. I put my hand on the door handle. The metal was cold. I turned it and pushed. The room was empty. All the compartment doors were closed. The voices had stopped the moment I opened the door. But there was something wrong. Something I could feel more than see. The room was different. The air was different. It was thick and heavy, and it pressed against me like a physical weight. I stood in the doorway, not wanting to step inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The refrigeration unit hummed. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. I made myself walk to the compartments. I checked each one, opening the doors, looking inside. We had 4 bodies in storage that night. All of them were exactly where they should be. None of them had moved, but one of them was looking at me. His name was Michael Torres, 26 years old. Car accident on the highway, dead at the scene. He was supposed to be transported to his family's funeral home in the morning. His eyes were supposed to be closed. They weren't. They were open, fixed on me, following me as I moved through the room. I'm telling you right now that dead eyes don't follow anything. They can't. The muscles don't work. The nerves don't fire. When a person dies, their eyes stop being eyes and become objects, no different from marbles or glass. Michael Torres's eyes followed me from one side of the room to the other. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran out of that room and down the hallway and out the front door. I got in my car and drove home and locked every door and window in my house. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. My manager called me on the 4th day. He sounded worried. He said people were starting to talk. He said I needed to either come back or explain what was going on. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he said I should take some time off. A few weeks, maybe more. He said the job could be stressful, and sometimes people needed a break. He said I should see someone, a professional, someone who could help me work through whatever I was experiencing. He didn't believe me. Of course he didn't. I wouldn't have believed me either. I took the time off. I saw a therapist. I told her about the sounds and the movements and the eyes that followed me. She said it was stress and grief and the natural result of working with death for so long. She said my mind was playing tricks on me. She said the bodies weren't really moving. I wanted to believe her. I tried to believe her. Then I saw the news story about the cemetery. The groundskeeper at St. Michael's had arrived for his morning shift to find one of the graves disturbed. Not dug up exactly, but the earth pushed up from below, like something had tried to force its way out. The grave was Mrs. Patterson's. They excavated. They had to, after something like that. They opened the casket expecting to find animals or erosion or some natural explanation. Mrs. Patterson wasn't inside. She wasn't anywhere. The casket was empty except for her burial clothes, which had been shredded from the inside. There were marks on the lid, on the satin lining, on every surface. Scratches. The same kind of scratches I had seen on Gerald Whitmore's compartment door. The police investigated. They assumed it was grave robbing, which made no sense because nothing was taken except the body. They talked to the family, talked to the cemetery staff, talked to us at the funeral home. They didn't have any answers. Neither did I. 2 nights later, someone knocked on my front door. It was past midnight. I wasn't asleep. I hadn't really been sleeping since any of this started. I was sitting in my living room with all the lights on, watching television without really seeing it. The knock was soft. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I sat there and listened. Another knock. Softer this time. Almost polite. I got up. I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. There was a woman on my porch. She was wearing a white dress that looked like it used to be nice but was now stained and torn. Her hair was gray and matted. Her skin was gray too, and her eyes were wrong, filmed over and reflecting the porch light in a way that living eyes don't. It was Mrs. Patterson. She raised her hand and knocked again. I watched her do it through the peephole. Her movements were slow and strange, like she was moving through water. Her knuckles hit the door, and I felt the vibration through the wood. I didn't open the door. I backed away from it slowly, not turning around, keeping my eyes on the peephole even though I couldn't see through it anymore from that distance. She knocked again, and again, and again. Then she spoke. Her voice was dry and cracked and barely there, like wind through dead leaves. She said my name. She said it like a question, like she wasn't sure if I was home, like she had come all this way to see me and she hoped I wouldn't disappoint her. I didn't answer. I didn't make a sound. I stood in my hallway and waited for her to leave. She didn't leave. She stayed on my porch for hours, knocking occasionally, sometimes speaking my name, sometimes just standing there. I could see her shadow through the window, a darker shape against the night. When morning came, she was gone. There were no footprints, no marks on the door, nothing to show she had ever been there. But I knew she had been. I knew she would be back. I left town that day. I packed a bag and got in my car and drove until I couldn't drive anymore. I ended up in a motel 600 miles away, in a town I had never heard of, surrounded by strangers who didn't know my name or what I did for a living. I stayed there for a week. Nothing happened. No sounds in the night. No knocks on the door. No dead eyes following me through rooms. I started to think maybe the therapist was right. Maybe I had been having a breakdown. Maybe I just needed to get away, to clear my head, to let my mind reset itself. I was wrong. On the 8th night, I heard something outside my motel room door. A shuffling sound, like feet dragging on concrete. I went to the window and looked out through a gap in the curtains. There were 3 of them. Gerald Whitmore was there, his face still ruined from the radiator, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Mrs. Patterson was there, in her stained white dress, her filmed eyes scanning the row of motel room doors. And Michael Torres was there, the young man from the car accident, his body bent at wrong angles, his head tilted to the side like his neck couldn't support it properly. They were looking for me. I knew it without knowing how I knew it. They had found me somehow, tracked me across 600 miles of highway and farmland and small towns that all looked the same. They were standing in the parking lot of that motel, and they were trying to figure out which door was mine. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched them through the gap in the curtains and prayed they wouldn't notice me. Gerald Whitmore turned toward my window. His eyes, or what was left of them, seemed to focus on the gap where I was looking out. He raised his hand and pointed. The other 2 turned. They all started moving toward my door. I ran. Out the back window of the bathroom, into the woods behind the motel, through branches and underbrush that tore at my clothes and skin. I didn't stop running until I couldn't run anymore, until I collapsed against a tree with my lungs burning and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. I could hear them behind me. Not close, but not far either. Moving through the woods with that slow, patient shuffle that I had heard in the hallway of the funeral home. They didn't need to hurry. They had all the time in the world. I was the one with a deadline. I made it to a gas station on the edge of town. I called the police. I told them there were people following me, dangerous people, and I needed help. They sent a car. 2 officers drove me back to the motel while I tried to explain what had happened without sounding completely insane. The parking lot was empty. My room was undisturbed. There was no sign that anyone had been there. The officers looked at me with something between concern and suspicion. They asked if I had been drinking. They asked if I was on any medication. They asked if I had anyone I could call. I told them I was fine. I told them I must have imagined it. I thanked them for their time and went back to my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair facing the door with a knife from the motel's kitchenette in my hand. Nothing happened. The next morning I left. I drove to another town, then another, then another. I never stayed anywhere more than 2 nights. I never told anyone my real name. I paid cash for everything and stayed off the main roads. It worked for a while. 3 weeks, maybe 4. I started to think I had lost them. Then I saw Mrs. Patterson standing in a field beside the highway, watching my car pass. Then I saw Gerald Whitmore in the parking lot of a diner where I had stopped for coffee. Then I saw Michael Torres sitting on a bench outside the motel where I had just checked in. They were always there. Not close enough to reach me, not fast enough to catch me, but always there, watching, waiting. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they chose me. Maybe it was because I was the first one to see them move. Maybe it was because I worked with the dead, and somehow that made me part of their world. Maybe there is no reason at all. All I know is that they are still following me. Even now, as I write this, I can feel them getting closer. They move slowly, but they never stop. They don't need to eat or sleep or rest. They just keep coming. I have been running for 3 months now. I have driven through 40 states. I have stayed in more motels than I can count. I have not gone back to my job, my home, my life. There is nothing to go back to. Sometimes I see them in crowds. A face that shouldn't be there. Eyes that track me as I pass. Sometimes I hear them at night, shuffling in the hallway outside whatever room I am staying in. Sometimes I wake up and they are standing at the foot of my bed watching me sleep. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. I don't know what happens when they finally catch me. Last week I made a mistake. I got careless. I had been driving for 18 hours straight, running on gas station coffee and fear, and I pulled into a rest stop to sleep in my car for a few hours. Just a few hours, I told myself. Just enough to keep going. I woke up to someone tapping on my window. It was a state trooper. He wanted to know if I was okay. He said I had been parked there for 12 hours. He said people had complained about a car that hadn't moved. I looked past him at the rest stop parking lot. It was full of cars, families, truckers taking breaks. Normal people doing normal things. And standing at the edge of the lot, near the tree line, were 4 figures. Gerald Whitmore, Mrs. Patterson, Michael Torres, and someone new. A woman I didn't recognize, though she was wearing the kind of dress we put people in for viewings. I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she came from. But she was with them now. She was part of whatever they had become. The trooper was still talking to me, asking questions, wanting to see my license. I couldn't look away from the tree line. They were closer now. Not walking, just somehow closer. Like the space between us was shrinking without any of them moving their feet. I told the trooper I was fine. I showed him my license. I answered his questions in single syllables while keeping my eyes on the dead. He didn't seem to notice them. He didn't look in that direction. It was like they weren't there for anyone but me. When he finally let me go, I drove away as fast as I could without getting pulled over again. I checked my mirrors every few seconds. I didn't see them behind me, but I knew they were there. They're always there. That was when I decided to write this down. Not because I think anyone will believe me, not because I think it will help, but because I need someone to know what's happening. I need there to be a record. If you find this, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. Maybe they caught me. Maybe I just couldn't run anymore. Either way, I want you to understand something. The dead are not gone. They are not at peace. Some of them, the ones like Gerald Whitmore and Mrs. Patterson and Michael Torres, are still here. They're walking among us, moving through the shadows, waiting for something, waiting for someone. I don't know why it's me. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. I wasn't cruel to them. I did my job with respect and care. I treated their bodies the way I would want mine to be treated. I didn't do anything wrong. But maybe that's not what this is about. Maybe they don't want revenge. Maybe they just want company. Maybe death is lonely in a way the living can't understand, and they're looking for someone to join them. The thought terrifies me more than anything else. I'm in a motel room right now, somewhere in the middle of the country. I've lost track of where. The walls are thin, and the carpet smells like mildew, and the lock on the door is the kind that wouldn't stop a determined child, let alone whatever's coming for me. I can hear them outside, not knocking, not moving, just standing there, breathing in that wet, rattling way that dead lungs shouldn't be able to breathe. There are more of them now than before. I can hear it in the way the air feels heavy. I can feel them pressing against the walls of this room like water against a dam. I'm tired. I've been tired for months. Running takes everything out of you, and there's nothing left to replace it with. Maybe tonight I'll stop running. Maybe tonight I'll open the door. Maybe that's what they've been waiting for all along. But I know it won't be over. Not for me. Not ever. Because I have seen what the dead can do. I have seen them walk and speak and reach for the living with hands that should be still. I have seen them come back from whatever dark place they went when they died. And I know now that death is not the end. It is just the beginning.